A lot of clients see pressure because they've been asked to, and I quote, implement AI. What does that mean? And what does it mean to the legacy and existing order?
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Slator Pod. Today, round 2 with Véronique Özkaya. So this time you're joining us, Véronique, as the co-CEO of DATAmundi, formerly known as Summa Technologies. So DATAmundi is a global provider of multilingual AI data and language services and tech. Hi Véronique, and thanks so much for joining today.
Good morning, Florian. Thank you for having me.
So this time, where in the world are you recording this from?
So this time I'm in Izmir, Turkey.
Izmir, Turkey. Great. I think we just spoke about it. Last time you were in Dubai, now Izmir, Turkey.
Spring is taking a lot of time to come here, but still it's a very great city and also a lot of tech talents in the city.
Very, very cool. Very cool. Never been there. Heard a lot of good stuff about it. So last time, November 2021, what happened? Give us the summary. Not the whole thing, but just what happened since the last pod. Give us a bit of a rundown there.
Two things happened. I think everybody saw that we got another big tech change, big tech, jump. In the 90s for our industry, we had TMs. In the 2000s was TMS, and then artificial intelligence with MT and neural MT, in the 2010s. And now it's AI, deep learning, AI models, LLM. So that happened, I think, major disruption. The second thing, so I left Argos. I had been CEO there for about 3.5 years. We grew the company 3.5 times, diversified services. And then I took a break and joined a company called Summa. And Summa, what was attractive was the focus on data for AI. That's what that, and also, they are backed by a PE funds. I thought there was a very nice governance and really a lot of very good ingredients for taking this company to the next level. And so since June 2024, that's where I am.
Excellent. Yeah, we had Chris on the podcast. Must have been also a couple of years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. One of the people that discovered Slator at the very early stage already 10 years ago. So I've had a lot of interaction with Chris before. So great. Now, DATAmundi, Summa. Give us the quick intro, piece the history here a bit for Summa, and now also tell us a bit about the rebranding, right? Because Summa was an established brand. DATAmundi was a brand I think you acquired with a maybe a 2 year ago acquisition. Right. So walk us through first the history of Summa a little bit, and then DATAmundi, the history, and then kind of the rationale and the process of the rebranding. That's a lot of questions, but I'm sure you can answer that.
The history is a little bit traditional. Entrepreneur, Chris, who kind of stumbles a little bit on the sector of language services through doing himself interpreting. He sees an opening in the market in Poland, and he's Canadian Polish. Already, knows a few languages himself, right? And he starts a small LSP. That's how it starts. So very traditional start. And then the company grew organically, and he made a series of acquisition post investment coming into the organization. And I think he made some very visionary investment. Two of them being Global Me in Canada.
Yeah.
And the other one being, as you mentioned, DATAmundi in Belgium. And what he saw is that we would need, for AI to fuel the systems with data. Because the challenges of AI are threefold. One is the not enough data. So you search for something and you don't get what you're looking for. Second, the hallucination. The answers you get, especially with generative AI, may not be correct, right? So how do you fix that? And third, bias. Because of course, what you get as an output is dependent on what the input is. So he really saw that as AI was exploding, that there was a very big addressable market, and so made these investment. So that kind of brought a different, let's say, list of services to the organization via acquisitions. And this, it started growing organically. When I joined, that was one of the major reasons I thought that this is the big addressable market. This is what every single company will need. They will have virtual assistants, chatbots, they will have productivity tools, they will embed AI into their systems. And I saw that language services are going to be more and more a feature on the platform. And for AI, you're going to need not only English, but you're going to need other languages too. So we do a lot of work in English that because AI predominantly is now in English, but then how do you address 8 billion people, right? Who are going to be using it on their phone, on their laptop, or in everyday life. So that was really the what got me going there. And then with the rebrand, we were thinking about the fact that Summa Linguae, yes, an established brand, but our market is mostly US, and we wanted a name that reflects what we do. And if you think about it, language service is also data, right? You have data in one language, and that data is transformed into other languages from multiple markets. So we wanted a name with data in it that kind of said what we were doing. And rather than trying to reinvent the name, and we had these discussions, of course, internally, we said, why don't we leverage the fact that we have that name? We have DATAmundi. So our CMO, Kathleen Bostic, came in September, and I think in October she probably already had the idea, because she made sure she got the domain and everything was done from a legal standpoint, so we could use DATAmundi as our name. And then after that, it was really a matter of organizing a lot of things behind the scenes, right? Because the rebrand, it's not just the website, it's all of the collateral, all of the IT, all of that stuff that happened in the back. And we had very interesting feedback from the industry, but from clients, because clients are getting it, and client and language services are also getting it because they see what that means for them in terms of really augmenting their value proposition within their organization. And I think that's where I see convergence of language services and data services. And some companies already, let's say localization units within companies, got that because they're being approached and being told, we've developed this system and that system, we need to roll it out. You guys know language. How do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's working with a company that has this type of rebrand probably also feels for a buyer as future-proofing themselves a little bit, right, towards all of the different stakeholders that they get internally that are approaching them and saying, hey, we have this little project or this little AI thing here or there. How can you help us? It's a great move. Can you just expand a bit? How does a history as a language service provider lend itself for an expansion in the data for AI? Because I remember talking to Chris about this like 4 or 5 years ago. We had this kind of Appen boom maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and some company went into it, others kind of didn't. But why does a history as an LSP, and there's other LSPs that enter the space, lend itself for this particular space?
I think it depends very much on the type of service you're going to provide. Right. So you were mentioning Appen. They grew very much because they did a lot of crowd work. So a lot of computer vision. Is this a dog? Is this a cat? You label the images, and the system is discriminative and say, yeah, that's a dog, that's a cat. So a lot of that work also for pre-training the models, and that needed like a lot of data, quantity of data, and we see that we're more as with this background in languages, very apt to do fine-tuning. Why? Because there's domain expertise and there's language expertise. These are the two things. However, I wouldn't say that any LSP can just reinvent themselves as a data provider. I can safely say that if this acquisition hadn't happened, I'm not sure that Summa would have become, a data services provider. I think, there's way more than meets the eye. It's not just that you have linguistic capabilities. This is kind of the layer on top of the cake. This is like the plus. I think you need to have deep technology knowledge, understanding of data science, understanding of what these models do, understanding of a lot of concept, and then you need to have the tech, the scale, and the talent. So the tech, because you need to be able to create work pipes very quickly. It's very rare that you have a lot of projects that are similar. Client comes with a problem and says, we are going to create an internal virtual assistant. That's the model we're going to use. Here's the data. Okay, what do we do with that data? And how do we improve it, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you've got services that are similar. So you've got data adaptation, labeling, et cetera, et cetera. But for each project, you may have to tweak it to a certain level. So back to your question, I think that it's important to be very realistic about what it takes to go into this. And if you kind of look at our sector, it's really the big agencies, the super agencies, as you call them, that have gone in that sector, and there's a reason for that. Our luck, and you make your own luck, right?
Yeah.
Was to actually come across a couple of companies that were niche, that were from the ground up built for data services to some level, and be able to incorporate that in our organization.
And when you say acquisitions, that was the Global Me acquisition. We kind of brought in the volume, but then DATAmundi brought in maybe some expertise.
Absolutely, the depths in so Global Me was more about data collection, audio data collection, text data collection, etc., etc. And DATAmundi had actually its origin in NMT, back people from SDL, Language Weaver, these kind of calibers. So really depth in not only in linguistics, but in tech, in linguistic tech. So that's, so DATAmundi started there. And Gert van Hash, our previous CTO, still with us, he was the one who really turned his company into a data services company. So when we bought them at the time, they were doing solely, they had completely gone into data services before really we heard about, ChatGPT. So the type of services were more complex. So data annotation, you would have, let me give you some, maybe a good use case where a client comes and says, okay, we have a model, we've got, let's say, a limited data set. So we do semi-supervised fine-tuning. So from this data set, it's extrapolated to the rest of the data. And then how do you build in the checks to make sure that everything has been labeled properly and fixed? Or it can be work that may be related to language. So let's say a client has got their own MT, right? And they want to make sure that the MT is not biased. So back to the third problem that we solve, right?
Yeah.
So take professions. That's an easy one. A nurse, in French, a nurse is typically, you would say une infirmière. It's feminine. Well, that's not right? There's also male nurses. So what we would do there is that we would collect data that's gender neutral. We would take the output from the MT from the client, and then using humans in the loop in this time, in this case, like experts, they will go and they would post-edit and create 2 sentences for a given profession, right, with the context. So that enriches the MT, and the MT is less biased as we do this iteration. So I think that's a good example for maybe language service providers to understand the relation between fixing that problem and where the linguists come into play.
So what's the current kind of state of the market in data for AI? Because as you said, we had this like early phase with the Appen, and I guess Linebridge had a very large data annotation business that was, massive crowds, hundreds of thousands of people, and that was kind of the edge. And then you had this next phase where you had companies like Scale AI come in, which, said they were going to be a lot more automated, but then there was all this kind of coverage in like, New York Times, et cetera, that they're also crowd. But where are we right now? Is crowd still a thing, or are we talking about physicists labeling specific math equations, or companies like DATAmundi, who obviously know the language space incredibly well, having highly trained experts in language doing what you just outlined before? So what's the state there?
So the state is still to some extent crowd, because while the big models have been pre-trained, that required crowd, there's still quite a lot of projects that require crowd. We call that level 1. And the challenge with that, of course, is not only finding the crowd, but also the retention, right? Because you're asking individuals to give up 2,000 of their Google photos that are going to go into a model, right? Who wants to do that for very limited amount of money? We're not really in that space. We do it, and let me maybe give an analogy. When you have a big localization project, it's great. That's where you're going to make a good money, and then the client sends you one sentence in 80 languages. You do it, right? Because that's part of your service. So we see that a little bit. Crowd for us is part of the service, but this is not what we go after.
Yeah, yeah.
What we go after is the more complex. And to your question, we actually do the linguists, but we also do the SMEs with linguistic knowledge, or just pure SMEs in
Yeah.
a given language. We may be asked to find a dozen cardiologists in Turkey for a model for a Turkish hospital. They buy the pre-trained model, and then they want to fine-tune it, but it has to be with data that's going to be relevant for the users. So you're the cardiologist, you're going to be, doing your check, you've got your diagnosis, you use the AI system to validate that, all that you've seen actually matches with the diagnostic that you've come up with. So my take also in terms of where the market is going, the growth is about 25 to 30% compound annual, growth rate. So if you compare that to language services, which is now probably about 5%, so that's, a faster growth. Also the size of the market. I mean, it's always very hard, right? That long is a piece of string. Right now, 5 to 6 billion in data for AI, but that's going to be 10 or 12 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. So what we see in terms of addressable market, and I think that's important, is that you've got the big tech companies. Everybody knows them. It's it's the Microsoft and the Meta and Google and Anthropic. All of they create these big models. And then what happens? They sell these models to other companies, be it in retail, in finance, in healthcare, and we specialize in tech, healthcare, medical, life science, retail, and then finance, but only in Europe. Again, and when you get into data, you understand anything to do with personal information and everything. This is also important. So that's what drives also our focus, right? The type of data that needs to be touched or provided. And so what we see is that it's the second wave that's coming now. Back to the addressable market. I am a retailer. I get a model from one of the big model providers. How do I fine tune that? And everything is in the data. If you're going to use, and I saw that, live at a conference in New York last December, a big consultancy company that said that they developed a internal AI assistant, and the usage for that assistant dropped within a week because the internal users were not trusting the answers. So they hadn't done their work on the data prior to releasing. Or they had done the work, but not to the extent that was sufficient to ensure that the workers would trust the model or trust the AI assistant and trust the validity of the data, of the answers that they were getting. So I think that's really the where we're at, is like, how do we fuel these AI systems for this next wave of implementation?
Got it. So the first wave was like the past 5 years, working with these hyperscalers, making sure they have these foundation models trained. And
Yes.
now, obviously, this is getting pushed into every nook and cranny of corporate land. And, they need help, no matter how large the company is. So would that also imply that maybe the business model is getting a little bit de-risked? Because I remember people telling me, hey, these projects are very bulky, like kind of one-off, like, name your hyperscaler comes to you and says, oh, I have this thing, I give you 10 million for it, but I need it back in 3 months. And then you scramble, you ramp up, you do it, but then nothing, right? So what you're describing would imply that more clients, but smaller projects, and maybe a little easier to kind of manage them.
Absolutely. And also this thing though, to, talking about risk, is that you need to really be working very closely with your clients in order to get more projects, more diversified projects, because you will still have this, back to our cardiologist, the model is trained, you might need to upgrade it a bit or fine tune it more, but, at some point it's working fine, and you may, there may be kind of latest research, and that gets uploaded in the system and it gets refined. So a bit of tweaking. But what's important is that you work with your clients to see what new issues are they going to try to solve. So take consultancy company, they've got their AI assistant. Okay, you just said it, every nook and cranny. This is really where also, so what you need to have is you need to have really good account management and also data science knowledge within your organization to be able to talk to the customers about the next challenges they're trying to solve. So, in any sector, in banking, it may be about fraud. That might be the first use case, right? It's like, are these transactions, you label them, and then you tweak it. There might be other things. It's like client behavior. You have a whole array of things. So you can't be in a, let's say, reactive mode too much. You need to be really in a proactive mode to understand what are the next challenges. What we hear from our clients, the next challenges is the race for SMEs. This
Yeah.
is what it's about.
Yeah. And that's where I guess somebody or a company with an LSP background is pretty good at spotting SMEs. I mean, as an industry, it's a pretty good industry that spots multilingual SMEs. And now
Absolutely.
you can have, SMEs that are not multilingual. How do you compete with these giants? I mean, starting with like something like Scale AI that got funded, I forgot, but it's probably, 10 billion or something, and the valuation is through the roof, or, Appen, which is still a big player, or then these super agencies that go after it. I mean, TransPerfect has a big unit. We Localize now launched Welo Data. You got RWS with Train AI. Like, how do you get in, or do you even compete with them? Do you see them at RFPs, or not that much?
We do. We tend to see maybe more the big agencies, the RWS, Scientific is a big player as well, or Willow. Sometimes also, mid-sized companies. So there's a mix. There's a mix. It's not so standard. But back to your question is about like understanding what's your ideal customer profile. Like I'm a salesperson at heart, right? That's where I come from. And you need to understand where you're the best at and where you play. And we've identified that one. So, number one, we're very nimble. So, we win deals because we're very quick. Number two, we have a platform that enables us to be nimble. And I think that's important. And that was also one of the reasons that, I really looked at DataMundi, because since 2019, that platform has been built up and
Yeah.
improved and improved and improved. And what it means is that when a client comes, back to a problem of very quick reaction needed because you have a new problem you need to solve, we can create a work pipe within hours, not weeks. And I think that makes a difference because clients, sometimes you're being told you need a project to start and be done in 3 weeks, and you can't wait for the tech to be ready. You
Yeah.
need to be able to bring that up. So I think that's the second thing, definitely, that's a strength. And then the talent curation. So we've had a database of talent that work with us ongoing. And I think that's the third thing that makes us win projects. So clients know us for certain things. So we do a lot of data annotation, right? That's a big thing for us, right? And seems like it's not yes, no, it's a lot of enhancement of the data. So that's where a client comes because they know that they're going to get the quality. And what we're doing is that we're opening our platform to the client so they can actually see how much the model is improving or the data set is improving with the work that we're doing.
Let's go to language services and technology. I mean, that's still a big part of the business as well. And,
Sure.
also our mutual background is in that area. Especially for me personally, I'm still exploring the data for AI area, and we're going to put some more research out. So hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be more knowledgeable. Back to language services and AI. What part of the kind of traditional, or yeah, I guess traditional languages industry do you see as being resilient to full-on disruption? Because disruption is real. Like, I hate this term. I've said it many times, but now it's actually an appropriate term because in the past 2 years, there has been disruption. So where do you, in your business, see areas that are actually resilient to AI from a like language services, translation, localization point of view?
I see two areas. One, I still believe that regulated industries to some level are going to be kind of coming to this wave later because of compliance, because of some legal barriers, right? So I think that sector, even though what we've seen is more and more appetite to try different ways, right, in the regulated industry, especially in life science. So, but still, I think that regulated industries. The second area that can be quite resilient, it's evaluation, right? Because you're applying the tech, but then how do you evaluate who pushes that green button before it gets released? So I think that area also is maybe a little bit, it's not kind of looked at deeply enough. I think that that's something, if I'm on the client side and we're going to be applying new tech or enhance the tech, I want to be sure that I can trust my supplier, to provide content that is not going to hurt anybody, that is going to be conducive to business, etc., etc. So that the evaluation, I think that's the second thing. Where I think the disruption is very real, is definitely more in the tech sector, but also in basic work. That I think it's just a matter of time, because you've got a lot of maybe agencies where they have a lot of small clients and like transactional, etc. My take is that cohort of client, that's something that's not gonna grow,
Yeah.
because really that is the most susceptible area to apply
Yeah.
tech and to access. So that, and I was thinking the other day, I was talking at home and saying, who today, if I asked you, Florian, instead of watching, I don't know, a documentary or a movie on a streaming platform, would you go out of your home in Zurich in the rain to go to a blockbuster, look at the different whatever DVDs, Blu-ray for 30 minutes, and then, by the way, if you haven't watched it within 48 hours, you're going to get a fine? That's, to me, the old way. Who, if you go out on the street and you ask 1,000 people, would they do that? How many will say, yeah, I really missed that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is about really, ease of doing business, lower cost, right? And no downside on the output or the quality that you get.
Yeah, I like the de-risking angle. I mean, the final expert layer on top that,
Absolutely.
if you have to get it right, you have that final expert layer, and it's just very complicated to build a business around it, and a lot of LSPs are seeing that right now, and they're probably a little bit in a defensive battle at the moment, but it'll be super interesting what emerges at the other end, and I think we're seeing this maybe in a year or two. Like, I think we're in the middle of this, but in a year or two, if anybody hasn't changed their workflow in like 4 years into ChatGPT, then it's probably something that's somewhat resilient to it, right? So you mentioned technology, like your own technology. You must be integrating a bunch of different solutions. Some of it you build yourself, some of it you license from others, some of it is maybe SaaS or whatever. So tell us a bit more about that. What type of tech do you have in a group that provides these types of complex services?
So in data services, we have our own tech. We have created a hub called ADA Hub, EIDA, like the Verdi opera. Our CTO is Italian, and that actually has been in the making for 6 years. So this is not something that we just created in 6 months. This is really the environment where all of our project management, resources, etc., work for data services, and that's where we create a work pipe. So that's for data. And then for localization, it's for data also, of course, we integrate with whatever the clients want.
Yeah.
Because some clients, they have their platform, they want you to work in there. We do that. What is good with having your data platform is for talent curation. It's fantastic. That's a biggie. It makes you save so much time. On the language services front, it's a mix. So we have our own special sauce. And back to your point of, leveraging the latest technology, our CTO comes from NLP and product, right? So it's been really interesting that in a few months he's actually kind of created this special sauce that you can put on top of his TMS, and that essentially hyper automate workflows. So this we haven't released yet. This is still in internal. We've shown a few of our trusted clients who want to pilot it, but I think that this is really what's going to be the roadmap for us in language services, is that we add that special layer, because we're not in the business of creating TMSs or whatever tech you want for the language services. We believe is that what is it that we can do that bit better that's going to benefit our clients. So that's what we've put our bets on in the language services technology, because there's a lot out there you can use.
There's a lot out there you can use, and I think the sauce is also in the integrating of all of these things, right, and making the most of it for your clients.
And maybe one thing that also, the change is not just through the language services providers. The change is through clients.
Yeah.
And I think that is a challenging one, because if you're a client and you've invested in language tech, you've bought your systems, right? And you've made that investment and you've got all these integrations, because enterprise localization is not so simple, right? There's, as you say, integration with ERPs, with content repositories, et cetera, et cetera. You have a lot of things happening in the background that we don't even see as a supplier. And if you're a localization entity within a client and you've made this investment and you've got these TMs and MT and TMS, etc., how do you break that? Or do you break that? I think that's, for me, a lot of clients see pressure because they've been asked to, and I quote, implement AI. What does that mean? And what does it mean to the legacy and existing order? And so that's why also I believe that change has been a little bit slower than you would expect, because you already have something that's in place. You have legacy systems. How do you just throw this out, or do you build on top? There's a lot of questions that haven't been answered yet.
Super complex. I mean, that's why it's taking, as you said, longer than you would maybe initially expect. Yeah, just how to restructure an entire enterprise content flow. And it's not just content, right? I mean, now everything needs to be AI from top to bottom. And then you see these companies now on X. I think we just had Duolingo coming out with a similar statement, like Spotify, like, oh, we're going to go full AI and everything needs to be AI and all the KPIs are AI and every like performance review is going to be based on how good are you using AI, how well are you using AI and stuff like that. So, but yeah, if companies like Duolingo and Spotify do this right now, and they're probably trailblazers, like it'll take a few more years for the others to follow.
Yeah, and also, let's not confuse AI with automation. I think a lot of companies still have got a level of automation to get to,
Yeah.
right? In order to implement AI properly, it's like, you don't put the roof on the house before the foundations and the walls are up. And because it's been bandied about so much and it's been a global phenomenon, it's something that, is talked about in the boardrooms. And we know that, we in our sector, MT was a big deal. But if you're, anybody out there, you'd know about like the Google Translate or whatever system that you may use, but not necessarily the corporate type systems, right? This is something I don't think that CEOs of big Fortune 500 companies spoke a lot about machine translation and neural machine translation. But
did not.
that you go on 20 earnings calls. Okay, it's been tariffs in the last few months,
Yeah.
right? But the earning calls, they're gonna say AI 40 times in an hour or something like that. So I think that it's been oversimplified. We want AI everywhere, etc. What does that exactly mean? For us internally, we are not saying we want everything AI. We're looking and say, where can we optimize? In what area, and what does that take, and what do we prioritize? And a lot of companies, I think, we come to that to say, what are the areas really where we're not so efficient and we can support our employees do a better job? Let's deploy in these areas.
Got it. Like, maybe talk a bit about the future and potential growth, also acquisitive growth. Are you seeing any potential acquisitions for DATAmundi on the radar? If yes, what type of capabilities or sectors? Or do you feel like with the rebranding and all of this, you have enough work on your plate right now?
We're happy enough that we have, very interesting work coming up. However, we are definitely active on the M&A front. And I changed my mind about it, actually, because I thought we may want to acquire some tech expertise and so on and so forth. And then what we realize is that no, what we're looking for is for service expertise. So a couple of things. It may be about increasing the breadth of the services that we provide, right? But the second also is more on the consultative side. So how do we go into these clients and help them deploy AI?
Yeah.
Back to back to this kind of problem or actually opportunity. If recently I met with a big engineering company. They've got 600 engineers that they need to train within a short amount of time in aerospace, right? And they're saying, how do we support them? and how do we make the knowledge come to them, right? And that's through data. But what system to use? Are they going to be using handheld devices? Where will they be? So that aspect of helping companies figuring out what model to use, what workflow to use, and where to make sure you get the data and clean the data and make sure that the data is going to be correct. That all value proposition, I think that's something that we're looking and saying, how do we find companies that can help reinforce that kind of service package?
What's on your roadmap for 2025? Also, like actual roadmap, like where are you going? What conferences are you attending? Because it's probably now also outside of the lock industry that you're traveling to.
That's true. We are. I'm still from a language industry perspective. Well, going to SlatorCon and going to a couple of events, and the reason for that is because there is convergence
Yeah.
of language services and data services. So that's where but way more limited than I used to go. And then we go to a number of AI conferences, like you've got AI World Summit. You've got different types of conferences. This year, we are scouting quite a few events
Yeah.
to see what makes sense in terms of us, having more of a presence or speaking slots, etc. It's very energizing.
Got it.
Because you're really into pure innovation, and you talk to all these companies and you see what they're doing, and the speed at which it evolves is like mind-blowing. And I think that from the benefit also for that, for a company like ours, from a cultural perspective, and for our talent, it's very exhilarating that they see a path for their career where they may be in one part of the company, and we've more than doubled the size of our data team in the last few months, and actually there's been a lot of transfers from one unit to another. And I think that's also really good for an organization when you're kind of pivoting or accelerating a certain service line to give people opportunities to work on exciting projects.
Great. Well, I'm glad we get to meet at SlatorCon in London coming up
Yes.
in about 3 weeks. So yeah, and thanks so much. That was super interesting. Thanks for taking the time today, Véronique.
My pleasure, Florian, as always.